I have lost a lot of weight, over 75 pounds that is. I know a lot of people in real life have noticed this about me. I'm not sure if as many people on my TikTok or YouTube page have noticed, since I don't usually show my whole body on those platforms. I'll be honest, I did have the help of a GLP-1, in particular semaglutide, which comes in two injectable forms, those forms being Ozempic and Wegovy. I did eventually switch to tirzepatide. I have struggled with my weight my whole entire life, even when I was a little kid. And by little kid, I'm talking from age 4 to age 9. I was quite chubby as a young child. I wouldn't say I was morbidly obese then, but it was apparent that I was definitely quite overweight. When I was 10, I became self-conscious about my weight. That's when I started exercising, dieting, restricting, and monitoring what I ate, which led to successful weight loss back then. By age 11, I was quite thin. I was never underweight, at least not by medical standards. Nonetheless, I was the thinnest one in my whole family. I managed to stay relatively slim from middle school all the way to the end of high school. However, I did go through bouts of BING throughout middle school and high school, which would lead to me to put on some weight, and then I would restrict my food intake to lose that post-BINGE weight. Despite all of this, I never got overweight during all of my middle school and high school years. Fast forward to high school graduation. At the time of finishing high school, I had a job in fast food, and I remained employed there for a full year after my high school graduation. Supposedly due to being introduced to fast food, I put on quite a bit of weight. I gained 60 pounds in less than 5 months. It was genuinely physically uncomfortable. Back then, I had undiagnosed small fiber neuropathy, which is a rare form of peripheral neuropathy, which I have, and is a chronic condition that causes chronic pain along with a multitude of other symptoms, which I was diagnosed with 3 years ago. This particular time period that I'm talking about was 5 years ago, so then at that point in time it was undiagnosed, and I'm sure the drastic rapid weight gain definitely did not help symptoms whatsoever, especially since I was working a job where I was standing all day. Yet I swear that the weight gain itself was physically painful. It was like I could literally physically feel my body struggling to accommodate that sudden massive weight gain. Then I quit my job. I fell into a period of depression, packed on another 20 pounds. I managed to pull myself out of it, and I lost 40 pounds in a year. Although I was still technically overweight, I looked and I felt a lot better. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining all the weight back, plus more, a year later. In July of 2024, I reached my highest weight of 214 pounds. I was so upset with myself, and I was yearning to get out of my current physical state. By then, I heard about the Ozempic craze, and out of desperation, I truly considered it. In late August, I brought up GLP-1s to my physician. She told me that was an option. She additionally informed me about other measures, including bariatric weight loss surgery. Now, in order to qualify for weight loss surgery, you either have to have a BMI of 40 or have a BMI of 35 and have co-occurring weight-related conditions. I had a BMI of 36, and I had high blood pressure and high cholesterol, which technically made me eligible despite only being on the cusp of the eligibility benchmark. My GP prescribed me Ozempic. Obviously, since I wasn't diabetic, my insurance did not cover it. The other brand of semaglutide, many of you might be familiar with, known as Wegovy, which is the one that is marketed for weight loss, could only be obtained through a lengthy prior authorization process, which would take months to complete. In the meantime, I was able to use Ozempic, and it worked. I lost 7 pounds in the first month and kept losing a pound a week thereafter. I'll be honest, it was not without side effects. When I was taking my second dose after, which would have been 7 days after my very first dose, so again, this is my second dose ever, within hours of injecting that dose, I puked my guts out. I know, TMI. And I would have reoccurring bouts of vomiting like 2 to 3 times a week. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night with gut-wrenching stomach cramps and diarrhea. And embarrassingly enough, I would often have these really intense nausea episodes at work, and I would randomly just start retching at work, which was especially embarrassing in front of guests. And I would sometimes explain to guests that I'm on a medication that causes really bad nausea, so the guests wouldn't think I was like doing it on purpose to like offend them or something. 4 months later, my insurance approved coverage for Wegovy. Now that my insurance is covering it at this point, I barely had to pay anything for it. Now, I won't tell how much my previous Ozempic cost, but I'll admit that it was definitely putting a dent in my wallet. So now I'm on this Wegovy. The weight loss was continuing. One could say that I was fulfilling another self-fulfilling goal of keeping up a job. I got hired for this job in October 2024, which, if you remember, that's shortly after I started my GLP-1 weight loss journey. It really did help to have something to keep me busy. This was kind of a huge deal for me because I was unemployed for 2.5 years prior to taking this job. So I consider that to be a worthwhile milestone in my life. Back on the subject of managing the side effects while on Wegovy, in order to manage the daily nausea and the weekly episodes of vomiting, I had to abstain from really high-fat, heavy foods like meat and anything that was fried. Anything that was fried would cause me to vomit just as fast as it went down. Now, I'm sure the vegans are going to love hearing about this. I found that a plant-based, carbohydrate-rich diet made me feel my best while on a GLP-1. This should go across the board. If you are not diabetic and you are using a GLP-1, you shouldn't go out of your way to restrict carbohydrates. Now, I'm not saying you have to like eat a whole loaf of bread or gorge yourself on the pasta. I'm just saying if you're not diabetic and you're using a GLP-1 for weight loss, there's really no need to be scared of carbs. It's common knowledge that GLP-1s were initially invented in order to treat type 2 diabetes, which by definition is a disease characterized by high blood sugar levels. If you're not diabetic and you're on this drug, which was designed to lower the blood sugar levels in diabetics, it's really important to get those carbs in to replenish those low blood sugar levels. Because I can say that low blood sugar is not fun. The dizziness, the headaches, not really fun. Of easeability of digesting, I found fruits to be the easiest to digest, which makes sense because fruits by nature tend to digest and absorb pretty quickly, which in contrast to something like meat, which takes a long time to digest anyway. And then when you're on this drug that slows down stomach emptying and then you're eating something that already takes so long to digest to begin with, it's compounding on that, and then you're creating this perfect storm, if you get what I'm saying. A toxic, putrefying mess just brewing in your guts, which was what gave me the puke. Sorry for the TMI story. Now, on to summer of 2025. In May 2025, one of my cousins was having a graduation party. At that time, when I attended, so much of my family was noticing my weight loss, complimenting me, and asking for a tip. At that point in time, I was about 180 pounds. So that's over 30 pounds lost since my highest weight, which was definitely enough weight loss to be noticeable, but I still had a ways to go yet. This is a dress that I wore to the family function. Not too long after this, my dose of semaglutide was increased. This caused my nausea, vomiting, and other side effects to increase tenfold. 4 weeks after the graduation party, a different cousin of mine was hosting an engagement party. In just those 4 weeks, I lost another astonishing chunk of weight due to my previous increase in the semaglutide. The dress I bought just 4 weeks ago for the graduation party no longer fit and was baggy, so I had to buy another of the same dress in a size down. At the engagement party, a lot of my family noticed how I lost another astonishing chunk of weight in such a short space of time. I just alluded to it being due to my efforts and working hard at it. My extended family, on my mom's side, the family especially, can be quite overbearing, so if they found out that I was losing weight due to being sick and frequent vomiting, they would be hauling my parents like, why would you let her be on that shit if it's making her sick? Despite what some of my viewers might think, I'm actually not a kid. I'm not a teenager. I'm a grown, mature woman, at least in terms of chronological age, not necessarily in terms of how I act. Every day at work, I'm asked if I'm old enough to be scanning their alcohol, and I often respond with, yeah, I'm old enough to scan your alcohol, right? And I'm old enough to be drinking it with you too. And I mean, sometimes even other children mistake me for a child. No kidding. Sometimes actual children actually mistake me for being one of them. You can only imagine the awkward situations I've been in because of looking like a child, but that'll be a topic for another time. Upon my dose of semaglutide being increased during the summer of 2025 caused me to experience another set of unpleasant side effects. Some of those being dizziness, lightheadedness, heart palpitations. Sometimes I would even go blind for 2 to 3 seconds when I'd stand up too fast. I brought this up to my GP, and she concluded on that these can be symptoms of POTS. I also do have someone in my family who has POTS as well. She did a basic test on me. She put a blood pressure and heart rate monitor on me, and then had me lay down, then go from a laying position to a standing up position while monitoring my blood pressure and heart rate. Something she observed was that as a result of my change in position, my blood pressure shot up, but my heart rate went down. She affirmed that this is a telltale sign of POTS. Nonetheless, in order to be diagnosed for certain, I would have to be seen by a cardiologist, per her own words. Additionally, she informed me that changes in blood pressure and heart palpitations can be caused by rapid weight loss in itself, because when you lose a lot of weight, there's less of you, less blood volume, and less overall blood vessel surface area. Because of this, the heart can have a difficult time adjusting to a different overall blood volume in the body. This can cause heart palpitations, dizziness, and sudden fatigue caused by the dips in blood pressure. Fast forward to September 2025, I was now down to 158 pounds. I had lost 55 pounds in the past 12 months so far. Needless to say, my increased confidence prompted me to buy a somewhat saucy bodycon dress. I posted this picture to my Snapchat story. I can honestly say that my closest friends on Snapchat responded positively. It felt like a dream come true. I have never lost that much weight on such a consistent, gradual, long-term basis. Before I ever used GLP-1s, my weight would just yo-yo, where I'd quickly lose 10 pounds, then just as quickly gain back 12, lose another 5, gain back 8, lose another 3 pounds, gain back 6, and so on, you know. I never lost weight on like a gradual basis, you know, like that. Unfortunately, a wrench got thrown in my weight loss journey. My annual insurance coverage for Wegovy had to be renewed. I could not access my semaglutide for several months. Now, the withdrawal was definitely not a cakewalk by any means. All of the food noise that was quenched by this drug just all came back full force tenfold. The first month of the withdrawal was definitely the worst, and I think that applies to most drugs in general. Suddenly stopping any drug, the first month tends to be the worst, and then it gradually starts to dampen from there. In my case, having to tap into every morsel of my willpower is not for the weak. I am someone who has struggled with binge eating in the past, and I can honestly say that during those entire 12 months of me being on semaglutide, I didn't binge, not even once. Now, during the withdrawal period, I will admit there was a few binges. Me and my willpower can only do so much. And in fact, I'm a believer that GLP-1s could be a potentially effective treatment for binge. I had to spell it out there because I cannot say anything even remotely within that direction without YouTube having a hissy fit over it. I have gotten other videos of mine age restricted. Now back onto the withdrawal, particularly the first 4 weeks, I ended up gaining about 5 pounds. And then as the symptoms of the post-withdrawal period started to dampen, I started finding it a little bit easier and easier to nip those binge urges in the bud. Those 5 pounds that I did initially gain were also probably water weight and food weight due to me having more food in me, due to eating more food in general. Sadly, in December 2025, my life was hit with a curveball. My grandma had passed away from cancer, and it was really not for a faint of heart situation. She was diagnosed with cancer in October 2025. It wasn't even 2 months until we lost her. Thankfully, I got to spend the last 48 hours of her life with her at her house by her side, which I couldn't have had any other way. I had to take off work, and while I was at my grandma's house, managers and supervisors were actually texting me and asking me how I'm doing, you know, given the tragic situation I'm in. And my grandpa was really impressed to hear of that coming from my workplace. He told me that I work for a very respectable company for them to do that. I'm sure anybody who has worked a day in their life can relate that, you know, some workplaces are more caring than others. I mean, I've worked at previous places where I can guarantee the managers, supervisors would be just like, whatever, just let us know when you're coming back. But my managers and supervisors cared and showed a lot of compassion during this not fun time of my life. Just a little less than 3 weeks later was her funeral, and I actually kind of had fun at her funeral, and I know that is a sentence that is very rarely ever honestly said, but I got to speak to distant family members that I barely even knew existed, never got a chance to talk to, and us building close connections, especially with people that I didn't have such a close connection with prior to, is just a very fulfilling experience for me. And I know when I told my mother the statement, I actually had fun at that funeral, and that is a sentence that is very rarely ever said. And my mom just said that her mom, i.e. my grandma, would actually be happy to hear that since she was always such a positive person. I get that was kind of a personal, emotional piece of my life that I shared there. Back to the relevant topic. At the funeral, many family members were still commenting and complimenting on my figure, size, and appearance, even though I was 2 months into the withdrawal. And thankfully, thanks to mustering up every little fiber of my willpower, my weight was still about the same as it was going off in September. Thanks to my scatterbrain, I think I forgot to mention this earlier. So once I was starting in with the prior authorization process, I was told by my nurse that in order for insurance to keep covering it, I either had to move up to the highest dose of semaglutide or start on a different GLP-1 altogether. Now, of course, I was already getting sick and vomiting pretty frequently on the dose of semaglutide that I was on, so I was definitely not gonna go there. So I went with go on a different GLP-1 path. And ironically, around the same time as my grandma's funeral, I got a message from my nurse saying that the prior authorization for Zepbound went through and was denied. And then when I managed to get back and say, okay, it's okay if it got denied, I'll just pay out of pocket for it. Then I got told by my primary care provider that the prior authorization never even went through in the first place. So it's like, what have they been doing for the past 4 months? And for the next 3 months following, so from January to March, I kept undergoing this cycling shit show of them saying that the prior authorization was denied. I can now pay for Zepbound out of pocket if I choose to. And then once I go in to do that, they tell me, no, actually, the prior authorization never went through in the first place. This happened like at least 4 times total. And while the so-called prior authorization was still going, even though I have no idea what they were even doing with it in the first place, when I would say that I'll just pay for it out of pocket, then they'd say, no, you can't do that. That's illegal. You can only legally pay for it out of pocket if the prior authorization goes through and was denied. And then the final prior authorization denial, since I'm not even sure what they were doing again, the nurse told me, no, actually, you can't pay for it out of pocket at all, even if it's been denied. And I was so confused, but you told me I legally can pay for it out of pocket if it was denied. And she said, no, that's still illegal, which honestly just tells me that this whole thing was just a bunch of bullshit that was spewed at me, especially with how the story kept changing. The story couldn't stay consistent. One of the biggest red flags that someone is either lying or bullshitting you is the story keeps changing. Inability to keep a consistent story, because after all, if you're being told the truth, the story wouldn't change, right? Thankfully, in the middle of March, I was able to obtain access to Zepbound. It's been about 3.5 months I've been on it so far, and I've lost another 30 pounds, as I am now 129 pounds as of today. I will talk more about my experience on Zepbound in my next follow-up video. So I hope you're glad that you finally got to hear from me. Have a good day, y'all. Bakeway Fofe loves you all.